The history of Nintendo is quite an extensive one, and rather than going through the entire history that dates back to the 1800s, I thought we'd start, well, with the Famicom and the NES, the consoles that are responsible for restarting and revitalizing the gaming market in the United States after its crash in 1983. Nintendo had been around for some time, dabbling in various different markets, from cards all the way to the Game & Watch systems. They even had multiple successful arcade titles, one of which was Donkey Kong, but they had never really been able to get a major handhold in the American market, and that is where our story starts. The 70s and early 80s were a great time for the video game market, with the market officially taking off and many companies making money hand over fist, so much so that Nintendo decided to take its shot at making a system to compete with the likes of Atari and Intellivision, two of the most popular consoles at the time. To that end, in 1980, Masayuki Yumira's R&D team at Nintendo started secretly working on a project aiming to make a console that was less expensive than its competitors while having enough technology to be more advanced than them for at least a year. To that end, they scrapped the idea of using a 16-bit processor like the Intellivision had, instead opting for an 8-bit processor with a custom GPU to drive the system. This allowed them to keep costs down while providing more advanced graphics than their competition at the time. The idea of a keyboard, modem, and floppy drive were also dropped, for fear of increasing costs. But they did add in a 15-pin expansion port on the front of the console for future add-on functionality with peripherals. They called this system the Famicom, and it launched in 1983, and it took Japan by storm. But it wouldn't be till much later that that expansion port would be used for peripherals that Nintendo had planned. While their console was having good success in Japan, in North America, Nintendo was having other issues. In one, in trying to bring the console to market, they initially tried to approach Atari, and had a tentative agreement until Atari saw ColecoVision running Donkey Kong on their up-and-coming Atom computer system. They had exclusive rights to the PC release of the game, and since ColecoVision had put it on their home entertainment system and the Atom system was backwards compatible, it was running on their PC as well. This angered Atari to the point where they refused to deal with Nintendo. By the time that the whole issue was resolved, it was too late, because Atari had its own financial issues due to the video game crash in 1983, leaving Nintendo without a distributor for their new console. After the gaming market crashed in the United States, Nintendo decided to go ahead and press on alone, and struggled to find a way to market their Famicom to the American market that now considered the whole thing a passing fad. To that end, Nintendo's lead product designer, Lance Barr, retooled the more toy-like Famicom into a clean, futuristic-looking system, with grays, blacks, and reds, calling it the Nintendo Advanced Video System and marketing it as a home computer. The system included a keyboard, cassette data recorder, a number of gamepads, a joystick, and a zapper that could fold into a gun or extend into a wand. The advanced technology was acknowledged, but everyone responded poorly to the keyboard and the wireless technology that they used for the controllers. Nintendo decided to scrap the original ABS and go back to the drawing board, and in June of 1985 showed up at CES once again with a stripped-down and redesigned version of the system, having abandoned the home computer approach, trying to make the system look as little like a computer or video game console as they could, even renaming the cartridges Game Packs and calling the console a control deck. The whole thing was referred to as an entertainment system. It also was part of the reason that they included the Zapper and Rob the Robot. They wanted it to seem more like a toy and less like a video game console. Despite this, people were still unwilling to sign up to distribute the console. It was then that Nintendo took its biggest gamble yet. They decided to distribute the system themselves, enabled not for a modest approach of hitting these smaller towns in the United States, but to hit FAO Schwarz in New York City, one of the biggest stores at the time, setting up dozens of units on display and paying real baseball players to play baseball on their console and sign autographs. It was a hit and drew in a major audience. It was then that they did their next gamble and offered a 90-day line of credit on their merchandise and would accept any and all returns on unsold inventory. This was unheard of at the time. The gamble worked and the system started to sell. Nintendo was now becoming the name in the video gaming industry, pretty much became synonymous with video games in general, with most people just saying, want to play some Nintendo instead of want to play a video game. And who could blame them? With the system coming with 2 controllers and often having a packing game with Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, you had 2 great games to play directly out of the box. It was also in part due to the high quality of the games that were released on the system, thanks to Hisashi Yamauchi, who instated a lockout system on the console, stating that Atari collapsed due to the fact that they gave too much freedom to third-party developers and the market was swamped with rubbish games. Thus, the Nintendo seal of approval was on each game, and it was a guarantee that the game met with Nintendo's strict quality standards and would work with their system. The quality of the games was further ensured by the fact that Nintendo themselves insisted on being the main provider of games for the console. Nintendo had an excellent first-party development team, and rather than outsourcing the majority of the game development, Nintendo pulled it in, wanting to keep the fate of the system to themselves, coming out with hit after hit, multiple Mario Brothers games, each rising to bar from the last, Metroid giving you one of the earliest non-linear exploration games that became a good part of the model for Metroidvania games. Next there was Zelda, one of the first games with on-cart memory to save your game. Up until this point, most games either use codes or some sort of external storage like a tape drive. Not wanting to miss out, third-party developers eagerly jumped in, like Konami, who brought with them the entire Castlevania series eventually to the system, and then later Contra as well. Capcom also jumped in with their Mega Man games, giving you each a new list of challenging robots and stages to conquer. Yes, it was safe to say that with Nintendo at the helm, kids had plenty to play. Parents didn't mind paying the cost for them, given that they had high replayability and good quality standards. They even opened a hotline that gave players ways to call in and get tips when stuck on certain sections of a game. They had tons of people hired who did nothing but play games and share tips via binders to aid gamers when they called in. They started a magazine also called Nintendo Power that would show the best-selling games, take questions from subscribers, and highlight new games coming out. This kept people invested in playing, talking about the latest edition, and discussing tactics and tricks that they had found, talking about finding this or that hidden secret in whatever game they were playing. All of this ensured that the market would not crash in the United States and kept Nintendo the dominant video game console market all the way up until 1988, where they would own 70% of the market with $2.3 billion in revenue a year. It was then that the Genesis and the TurboGrafx 16 would rise up and try to compete with the tiny little console, eventually leading them to launch their own 16-bit console, the SNES, in 1990. That did not stop them from supporting the console. It wouldn't be till 1995 that the console would be fully discontinued in the United States, and 2003 for the Famicom, making it one of the longest running consoles ever on record. I'd like to take a moment to thank you guys who stuck with me this long through the video. Hopefully you enjoyed this insight into the NES's history and how they saved the gaming market. I'd also like to ask that before you go to hit the like, subscribe, and the notification bell. It really helps my channel and lets me know that what I'm doing is truly worthwhile. But for right now, thank you again for watching, and until next time, happy gaming.